It was nighttime in Konoha, and one Anko Mitarashi was currently walking down the street with a takeout bag full of dango. A small spring in her step as she decided to spend the night binge watching her favorite movies in her apartment. It honestly would feel nice to just lounge around and relax instead of worrying about her curse mark or flipping off guys pestering her for dates. Some cat calls and whistles were heard from passerbys of the male variety, and the occasional female, but the snake mistress ignored them all, not even giving them a second glance. As she continued on her way, she spotted the form of one Naruto Uzumaki passing by and gave him a friendly wave, which he returned with a broad smile. Judging from the bags in his hand, it seemed like he had been grocery shopping. After their brief exchange, they continued to their respective homes without missing a step. Anko felt her mouth drool a bit as she could almost taste the dango on her tongue, until she heard a small oof, followed by the sound of a body and some items hitting the ground. She turned and spotted some civilian man with a bottle of sake in hand as he laughed at the fallen form of Naruto, who was busy gathering some of his cup ramen back into his plastic grocery bags. "Watch where you're going, filthy brat." The man spoke in a slightly slurred tone and then kicked the boy in the ribs, knocking him to the side. The civilian chuckled a bit as he stumbled along, but Anko felt her face heat up in anger, so she called out, "Hey, asshole." The man in question turned back around with a confused expression on his face and spoke, "You talking to me?" At his question, the purple-haired kunoichi held her arm out and dropped her bag of dango to the ground and began walking forward, while in the background a group of civilians scattered and ran for their lives, knowing that if Anko drops her dango, it usually spells disaster. "Yeah, I am talking to you. Asshat. You see that kid there? He's got a name. It's not Brat. It's not Demon. Or Demon Brat. It is Naruto Uzumaki. And Naruto so happens to be a good buddy of mine. Why? Might have to do with the fact we're both outcasts," she explained with her hands in her pockets as she stomped towards the man, who merely gave a smirk and a scoff. "What's that got to do with anything?" The man slurred as he took a swig of his alcoholic beverage and let out an obnoxious belch sound. "Well, glad you asked. When fool civilians like you, who think they can do whatever they want, hurts a kid. Especially this one. It really gets me steamed up, and not in a good way." "In what way, you might ask?" "Like I wanna do this," she yelled out and then slammed her knee into his crotch, making his eyes bulge out in pain. "Or this," she screeched as she ripped the bottle from his hand, and then smashed it into his face, making glass explode in all directions on impact, and even some shards getting planted into his skin and flesh. She then grabbed him by the throat and began to repeatedly punch him in the face, making blood and saliva fly out from the force of the blows, followed by some rotten-looking and yellowed teeth. Once she had beaten the man within an inch of his life, she pulled him to his feet and stared him directly in his nearly swollen shut eyes as she spoke, "You touch Naruto-kun again, and next time, I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life eating your food through a straw. There are things much worse than death. I promise." With her point made, she tossed him to the side of the curb and then kicked him in the ribs, hard. Hard enough to make a small crack noise as he whimpered and crawled to his feet, staggering away. After a moment of catching her breath, she came over to her blonde friend and spoke in concern, "You okay there? He didn't hurt you too bad, did he?" The whiskered teen gave a dismissive wave and replied, He kicks like a fangirl. Just another annoyance. But won't you get in trouble if he reports you or something, Anko-chan? If he does, I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. Though I'm pretty sure that Hokage-sama will let me off easy if I make mention that guy hurt you. Wouldn't be the first time I've beaten up some punk-ass civilian getting too big for their britches," she replied and then collected her bag of dango. "So how's things at the academy going for ya?" she asked with a sweet smile, hoping and waiting for the day that she could take on a worthy apprentice and become a full-fledged jonin. But then she noticed a downcast look on his face and asked him, "Oi. Why the long face, booyah? You have been studying for the exams and all right." The blonde nodded and replied with a small sigh, yeah. The written stuff I can handle at this point, but it's the jutsu portion I'm worried about. The substitution and henge I have down pat. But that bastard Iruka won't tell me what it is that I'm doing wrong with the clone jutsu. And every time I ask for his help, he just replies in this snobby tone, just work harder Naruto, or he'll say, sorry. I can't play favorites Naruto. Shit. That asshole. I shoulda known. No wonder you're stuck in the academy with a piss poor teacher like that. Though I don't think it'd hurt if I gave you a few pointers on what you're doing wrong. Maybe show you a special trick to making stronger clones. The purple-haired woman replied and then affectionately pat him on the head, earning a large smile from him that made her heart flutter a bit. Really? You'd do that for me? It'd really be a big help for me if I could figure out what's wrong with my clone jutsu. He spoke in gratitude, his smile continuing to grow wider as he now seemed to be bouncing on the balls of his feet. Sure thing Naruto-kun. I'd do anything for ya. And hey, if any of those civilian assholes are bullying you, you can come straight to me and I'll beat them up for ya. No questions asked. Say, you wanna come over to my place for the night? She asked him while scratching her cheek a bit with a small blush. You sure that's okay? What about your roommate Kurenai? The blonde asked her, not wanting to inconvenience the two kunoichi with his presence. It's fine. I was gonna spend the night bumming around on the couch watching the Princess Gale movies. Kurenai's on a mission for the moment, should be back in time for the Genin graduation exams. Besides, I don't think it's safe for you to be alone right now. She replied as she jabbed a thumb in the direction of a passing group of men who seemed to be glaring at the two pariahs, most especially Naruto. Oh, good point. Seriously though, don't they have anything better to do than try to make my life miserable? The blonde boy asked with a mildly depressed sigh as Anko retrieved her bag of dango. Can't be helped. You're a constant reminder of the Kyuubi attack. Lot of people died that night. And instead of trying to accept the pain and move on with their lives, people seem to like having a convenient scapegoat to take their anger out on. I should know. Anko answered as she rubbed the back of her head with a frown. Oh, right. The Orochimaru thing and the curse mark. Any cure for that damned hickey been found yet? The blonde asked with some hope in his voice, knowing full well that the curse mark was both an unwanted reminder of her traitorous sensei and a constant source of pain and discomfort. He couldn't help but notice that Anko bit her lip as he followed her to her apartment, her face taking on a sickeningly green color. Anko. Something wrong. You look kinda sick. The blonde pointed out, snapping the snake mistress from her lapse of attention. Wah. Oh. Well, kinda sorta. There's this guy. Jiraiya. Self-proclaimed seal master, that sort of thing. Claims to have a cure for my curse mark. She replied in a somewhat distracted tone as she rubbed the nape of her neck and her shoulder where the mark was located. Really? Then what's the problem? The blonde asked with a raised eyebrow as they approached Anko's apartment complex. As she fished out the key from her pocket, the dango lover answered him, well. Jiraiya's a great pervert. He's dangling this cure over my head like a carrot to try and coerce me into having with him. I want to be cured, but I don't know for sure if this cure will actually work, and there's just some things I don't want to trade for anything. Not even being rid of the curse mark. At the end of her explanation, the blonde's face scrunched up as he spoke flatly, the bastard's blackmailing you for. That's just disgusting. Can't you report him or something? At the end of his question, Anko unlocked the door to her home and ushered the blonde inside, locking it behind them. Thought about it. I really want to, but it's way more complicated than that. I am kinda stuck right now and I'm not sure what to do about the pervy asshole. It'd be my word against his with the sandame anyway. She muttered the last part in frustration, her fist tightening into a white-knuckle grip. What was that last bit? I didn't hear. Naruto asked as he placed his groceries on the kitchen counter, wondering what his best friend was talking about under her breath. It's nothing. Forget about it. Anyways, Let's just enjoy the night, yeah. Anko replied with a broad smile, putting on her usual boisterous mask which didn't go unnoticed by the blonde, but he chose not to comment on it, instead deciding it was better just to have some fun instead of talking about depressing stuff. Appreciating his understanding since he wasn't going to pressure her on the subject, she placed her bag of dango on the table resting in front of the couch and then popped in the first Princess Gale film to start off their movie night. With that done, she plopped herself down on the couch with Naruto following right behind her. As the opening scene and credits of the movie played, Anko muttered just loud enough for her friend to hear, "I'm glad you're my friend Naruto-kun. It means a lot to me." The truth was, Anko was very much in love with Naruto, even though she couldn't admit it out loud at this time, not to mention there was something of an age difference, but it wasn't that wide a gap. And if he became a genin, then he would also become a legally registered adult according to village laws. Still, he was so young and innocent, and somewhat dense when it comes to romance, so she didn't want to force her feelings onto him until he'd matured a bit more. Same here. I don't think I would have made it for very long without you. You've done a lot for me over the years, Anko-chan. I promise to someday find a cure for your curse mark. And if the one this Jiraiya guy claims to have is the real thing, then I'll just beat it out of him. His promise earned a small giggle from her, but she nodded in appreciation all the same for his enthusiasm. At last, things started to move along in their film, so they continued to enjoy each other's company as Anko opened her bag of dango and alternated from popping one in her mouth, to placing one in her favorite blonde's waiting mouth. Kushina-sama, I'll look after your son for you. No matter what. She thought silently as she fondly remembered the woman who had taken care of her after Orochimaru's betrayal. Anko then smiled warmly, feeling utterly and truly happy right now in Naruto's company. His happiness, love, and affection meant everything to her. And no one, not on Kami's green earth, would dare bring harm unto him if she had a say in the matter. No one. For years she had suffered in the village ever since her former sensei had abandoned Konoha and left her for dead after using her as a guinea pig for his curse mark. People would always look at her with disdain, muttering behind her back that she was some kind of double agent, that she was still the traitor's whore, and then they began circulating rumors that she was a who took on many seduction missions to make her look like some kind of addict. All of which was false since she was still a virgin to this day, and was saving her first time for that special someone. Naruto, as mentioned earlier, was similar to her in many ways, and perhaps more importantly, he had unconditionally accepted her in spite of the rumors and slander. That kindness alone meant the world to her. In some ways, Naruto was her guiding light in this harsh, cruel, and unforgiving world filled with darkness and hypocrisy. As the night dragged on and they watched movie after movie, the hours started to tick by. Anko looked down and noticed that the whiskered teen had already fallen asleep, his head now resting on the side of her. With a small smile she gently maneuvered his body so that his head now rested on her lap, a small blush and a happy smile on her face as she gently massaged his scalp, her fingers running through his hair as she looked down at his peaceful expression. She could feel butterflies flitting about in her stomach, and a pleasing warmth with each beat of her heart inside her chest. This is true happiness, she muttered to herself. She then picked him up in a bridal carry and brought him into her bedroom to place him on the bed, being sure not to wake him up as she pulled the sheet onto his sleeping frame. With a satisfied sigh, she pulled off her trademark trench coat and tossed in a random direction, followed by the mesh armor that barely kept her modesty, and then the rest of her clothing were tossed about the room until at last she was as the day she was born. Licking her lips in a sensual manner she slowly creeped up towards the blonde, then slowly slipped into her bed and snuggled up against his body. Her taking his arm into her cleavage as her hand upwards to his face, and she began to trace a finger along his signature whisker marks. Soon. Very soon. Someday soon. You'll be all mine. And we can live together in happiness, she whispered to herself as her eyes drifted closed and she fell into a deep slumber. For some reason, Whenever she slept with Naruto like this, it felt like she could forget the scorn of the village, and the pain caused by her curse mark would melt into nothingness. It was in moments like these that she felt truly happy. The next morning, Anko's eyes fluttered open as she stretched her limbs with a yawn, groaning a bit in disappointment that Naruto was no longer in bed with her. Instead, there was a note on her nightstand. She picked it up and read the words on it. Sorry for leaving you, Anko-chan, but gotta get to the academy on time. Could you please hold on to my groceries for a bit till I come back to pick them up? Would be appreciated. P.S. Your tits are as soft as ever. She couldn't help but giggle at that last part as she got up, her nose scrunching up as she caught the familiar scent of coffee. Raising an eyebrow, she left her bedroom and found her roommate Kurenai sitting at the dining table while sipping at a mug of coffee. Morning. I met Naruto on his way out. I see you invited him to stay the night, again. And you slept with him, again. The crimson-eyed woman spoke in a flat tone of voice. Yeah, I didn't see the harm of letting him stay. And come on, it's not like I do anything nasty to him. We just cuddle, and he actually likes it when I am. Anywho, you're back a bit sooner than I expected. Anko noted as she sat across from the genjutsu mistress, the dango lover having a happy expression on her face. Anko, we need to have a talk. A serious talk. Kurenai stated as she pushed a second mug of coffee in the snake user's direction. The purple-haired woman picking it up and taking a sip before asking in a lazy tone, about what? I am a bit concerned about your relationship with Naruto. I know about your feelings for him, and I don't think that pursuing a relationship of the romantic kind would be very good for you. Kurenai stated in a more gentle tone of voice, and then seemed a bit saddened as her friend was now glaring at her. Excuse me, Nai-chan, I love you like a sister. You've always been good to me, and had my back whenever I needed it. Hell, I even held my tongue and quietly supported your relationship with Asuma. But you can't do the same for me and Naruto-kun. He's a good kid. He's sweet, gentle, understanding and… Anko began to list off but was then cut off by her friend. And still a child. Anko, you're an adult woman. I know how much you care for him, but you have a nasty habit of being rather clingy. And your obsession with him has become somewhat unhealthy. Shouldn't you try and find someone more age-appropriate? Someone you can truly be happy with? The crimson-eyed woman asked with a worried expression, trying not to push Anko's buttons in the wrong way since she was known to be hostile when matters involved Naruto Uzumaki. I tried. I did. I went on a few dates here and there. All of them kept giving me this look. Like hungry dogs eyeing a piece of meat. They all wanted the same thing. All they wanted was to try and me because I'm the so-called snake whore. But Naruto's different. He doesn't look at me that way. And whenever I'm around him, these feelings well up inside me. And I just can't picture myself with being anyone but him. So what if there's an age gap? It's not that wide anyway. I'm not some old granny with a foot in the grave. The snake mistress argued as she slammed her fist down on the table. He doesn't look at you like that because he doesn't understand what it truly is you want with him. He is a boy still going through puberty, and sure he is taking notice of girls and women, but he is still ignorant when it comes to UAL relationships. If you try to push your feelings onto him and have with him, then you could. The genjutsu mistress tried to rationalize, but her voice fell silent as Anko stared at her as though she wanted to burn a hole through her skull. Shut up. Naruto-kun needs me. More than anyone. I have cared for and protected him for years. I fed him whenever he didn't have enough money for food. I cared for him when he was sick. I tutored him when he struggled in his studies. I protected him from the more violent elements of the village. Me. Not the Hokage. Not that useless Jiraiya. Me. All me. I love Naruto-kun. And no one is going to take him from me. Anko shouted angrily. Her face flushed red as she snarled a bit. A small tear came down from Kurenai's face as she replied, I see, then I wish the best for you. I can see there's no persuading you otherwise. There was something else I wanted to talk about. I'm leaving. The genjutsu user spoke, snapping Anko from her anger. Leaving? The you talking about? Anko asked, not sure what her longtime friend meant by that. It's time I started to move on with my life. Asuma and I are going to move into an apartment together. We're taking our relationship to the next level. Kurenai explained with a small smile of affection crossing her lips. Oh, I'm so happy for you. Anko replied in a bitter voice, feeling somewhat betrayed by Kurenai for not accepting that she wanted to be with Naruto, and for up and leaving her all high and dry like this. I'm sorry Anko, but I promised to come and visit. And me moving out isn't the end of the world. We can still be friends. But I'm tired of being labeled as the Ice Queen of Konoha. I just want to settle down with a nice boyfriend and move on. I don't want to be some kunoichi that acts cold-hearted all the time. Kurenai spoke as she rubbed her temples, feeling somewhat drained now that she'd had her talk with Anko. She could clearly see the hurt look on her friend's face. The crimson eyes woman tried to place a comforting hand on top of Anko's own, but the snake user snatched her hand away, refusing to look at her friend. I'll come back to get my things later. I need to turn in my mission report anyway. Kurenai spoke softly as she left, deciding it'd be better to leave Anko alone so she can process everything. As Kurenai opened the apartment door to leave, Anko spoke up, remember that promise we made? To Kushina-sama, we promised we'd look after her baby no matter the cost, no matter who we had to kill, or who we had to hurt to keep him safe. That we would love and cherish him above all else. Doesn't that promise mean anything to you now? At her questioning, the genjutsu mistress looked over her shoulder with a small frown on her face. We were children then Anko. We promised a lot of things. But Kushina's gone. And nothing will ever bring her back. Kurenai replied flatly, which earned a chuckle from her longtime friend. You aren't moving on with your life, Nai-chan. You're running away from your responsibilities. The responsibilities that really matter. And when you are faced with the sins of abandoning Naruto-kun, I will very happily say, I told you so. By the way, if you're seriously moving in with Asuma, tell him to do something about his chain smoking. Shinobi work is hazardous enough without adding lung cancer to the mix. Anko spoke in a half-serious and half-mocking voice which earned a small nod from Kurenai since the snake user made a valid point on the lung cancer comment and then departed, leaving the snake user to sigh deeply and continued to drink what was left of her coffee, her mood now seriously soured, her eyes glancing over the bag of foodstuffs that Naruto had left behind. Come to think of it, did Naruto-kun have time to make a bento? God damn it. He probably took the high road and went to the academy without taking any food with him, even after I told him he can help himself to what's in the kitchen if he ever gets hungry. She muttered and began to hurry about her kitchen to make a meal for her favorite blonde. After all, one can't properly study at the academy, especially in Iruka's class, on an empty stomach. Later on. Haha. I'm bringing Naruto-kun lunch. I feel kinda like a waifu right now. Anko Mitarashi. Why, sadistic, and loving waifu to my little Naruto-kun. I love the sound of that. Anko muttered to herself happily, her previous anger against Kurenai now forgotten as her mind now seemed solely focused on the Kyuubi's container. As she neared the academy she stopped for a second as she heard what sounded like arguing, and one of the voices definitely belonged to Naruto. Peering around the corner of the academy's gates, she spotted the whiskered teen in some kind of argument with one Sakura Haruno. Hey, don't speak that way about Anko-chan. Naruto shouted, making the snake user raise an eyebrow, wondering why she was the subject of their argument. I can say whatever I want about her. And don't think that I don't know what's going on here. You're just trying to make me think that you have a fetish for older women so that I'll get jealous and try to prove that I'm much more of a woman than that snake whore. Nice try, but Sasuke-kun's the one for me. Sakura spoke as she crossed her arms with a haughty-looking grin on her face. Firstly, that doesn't make sense. Secondly, Anko-chan will always be 100 times the woman you are. And thirdly, A loud howler monkey like you, and the brooding emo king deserve each other. And Anko's not a whore. She's one of the most hardworking, loyal, and loving kunoichi I've ever met. And someday when I'm Hokage, I'm gonna make her my wife. Naruto shouted, his words making Anko's heart flutter. If he wanted her to be his wife, then he must seriously have feelings for her. Feelings of love. Please. My daddy says that her sensei was Orochimaru and that she would his at the snap of his fingers, and they did all kinds of nasty and dirty things with their snake summons. At her words, Naruto clenched his fist and stomped towards her as if he wanted to slug her across the face, but then he stopped and gripped the front of her shirt, pulling her towards him until his face was only a few inches from her own. Normally, I would have clocked you for that, but it wouldn't be fair to hit you for whatever lies your dad's been telling you. Anko's not a whore, not a nympho, and not a traitor. She's paid her dues and proven time and again she's a loyal kunoichi. It's not her fault she had Orochimaru for a sensei. And for the record, she's actually still a virgin. If you keep on talking shit about my crazy snake lady, then I'll be happy to settle things with you during class spars. The blonde threatened at the end with a grin that would easily make the snake mistress herself proud as the pinkett paled. Saying good things about me, Naruto-kun? Asked a familiar voice behind him, causing him to release Sakura as he turned was met with the form of the Dango lover herself. Oh, hey Anko-chan, fancy seeing you here, haha, how much did you hear? He asked at the end while slumping his shoulders. More than enough. Gonna make me your wife, huh? Think you're man enough to handle me? She asked with a sweet smile that she tried to fill with as much venom as possible to make it seem like she was mad, but failed since nothing but happiness and warmth filled her face. Hey, if I can't satisfy my wife then I'd be a pretty disgraceful Hokage. Scratch that, I wouldn't even be able to call myself a man. He answered with a sheepish grin as he rubbed the back of his head. Oh, you been reading up on the birds and the bees or something behind my back? She asked while lightly punching him on the shoulder, making him shrug in response as if to say, maybe. Oh, by the way, what brings you here? He asked her, finding it a little strange that she would come to the academy of all places. At his question, the purple-haired woman held out the bento she had made for him and he took it from her hands, now realizing why she had come. You made a bento just for me? He asked with some tears welling up in his eyes. Told ya I'd do anything for ya, was her reply, a somewhat smug grin on her face as Naruto took her by surprise and wrapped his arms around her neck, pulling her into a kiss. Her eyes widened in surprise, then slowly closed in bliss as she returned the kiss. Meanwhile, inside her mind, a chibi Anko was dancing waving around a sign that said, Victory. She was a little sad when they had to break the kiss, but the need for air made it necessary. Then suddenly, Anko got an idea as a light bulb seemed to blink over her head. Naruto-kun, there's something I wanna talk to you about when you get out of the academy. She spoke, planning on inviting him to live with her in her apartment since Kurenai was moving out. Looking back on it now, maybe it was a blessing in disguise. Go face someplace else, creeps. Spoke the form of Sakura, ruining the moment making Anko's face drop into a scowl. She then put on a sickly sweet smile and turned to the pinkett, slowly stepping towards her almost like a feline ready to pounce on its prey. Listen to me, very closely Haruno-san. Naruto-kun is the most precious thing in the world to me. And he tells me that you like to occasionally use him for a human punching bag. If I learn of your continued abuse towards him, I promise to kidnap you, lock you away somewhere where nobody will ever find you, no matter how much you scream. Maybe I'll leave you for the rats to munch on, maybe I'll leave you down there to starve to death, or maybe I'll just cut apart your womanhood so you can't breed. The last thing we need is you procreating more Harunos. Anko threatened in a chilling voice, making Sakura pale and then run away in tears, trying to put as much distance between herself and the crazy snake lady. Yup. Just another satisfying day to be Anko Mitarashi. The only thing that could top this would be if Kushina crawled out from the grave and gave her blessing for her and Naruto-kun to marry. Meanwhile, what do you mean that you haven't made any progress? Spoke the form of a goggle-wearing man named Torun, a close subordinate and aide to Danzo Shimura as he and his partner Fu Yamanaka walked down the hallways of a hidden root facility that had been recycled from an abandoned Orochimaru laboratory. Exactly as I said, the subject's mind is exceptionally complex and has repeatedly detected every attempt to dig around inside her mind, and accordingly repelled the mental probes. Even with the drugs keeping her in a medically induced coma, if I poke and prod too much, it is still possible for her to regain self-awareness and possibly awaken. It's a very delicate procedure we're dealing with here, explained the orange-haired man in a frustrated voice, making his partner shake his head. As they both eyed the form of one Kushina Uzumaki, her form lying in a hospital bed as machinery constantly pumps drugs into her to keep her in a state of limbo. Danzo-sama won't be pleased. He seems to think that Uzu holds the secrets to true immortality and longevity. Torun muttered as he crossed his arms. Might be a kernel of truth to that belief. Kushina has spent over a decade in a comatose state but shows absolutely no signs of aging or even muscle atrophy. If it weren't for the drugs, I'm certain she'd wake up and kill us all. And that wouldn't be the worst of it. Fu spoke with a shudder. Not the worst. This is Kushina, the evil Uzumaki we are talking about. Back during the wars, she was known to scalp her victims for fun. She tortured, maimed, burnt, crucified, castrated, disemboweled, and beheaded people every single day and laughed about it all like it was a joke. What could be the worst thing she could do? Torun asked skeptically, fully aware of the woman's ferocious reputation. She could become the Hokage. The orange-haired man replied as his face paled in terror, causing his partner's mouth to drop open for a moment before he nervously nodded in agreement at the thought. Hiruzen Sarutobi was currently little more than a glorified paper pusher at this point of time in his old age, but if the likes of Kushina took over, then she'd steamroll her way over everyone just to get what she wanted, without care of consequence. Unknown to them, a small smirk crossed Kushina's face, and her hand twitched slightly before clenching into a fist. Later that day, Sakura Haruno growled as another school day had passed and Sasuke had still ignored her. And now Naruto seemed like he was going to ignore her just as well for some old whore. Freaking stupid dead last, what's that Anko bitch got that I don't? The Pinkett muttered angrily to herself as she cut through an alleyway to get home as quickly as possible, until she bumped into someone who rounded the corner, causing the fangirl to fall to the ground. Nice tits. Great questionable but why sense of fashion. And a badass can-do attitude. What you got going for you, Pinkie Pie? Asked the form of Anko, who was now standing above Sakura with a grin. The Pinkett sighing in frustration as she got up and dusted herself off. The hell do you want now? Wait. Were you following me? Sakura asked, feeling it was kind of staged how she just randomly bumped into the snake whore again. Maybe a bit. There was something I forgot to tell you. Something that I couldn't say in front of everyone else at the academy, especially Naruto-kun. Anko replied in a jovial manner as she walked towards Sakura with an exaggerated sway to her hips. Oh yeah, what's that? The fangirl asked while swallowing a lump in her throat as she slowly backed away, feeling far more in danger than ever before in her sheltered life as the only daughter of the Haruno family. Here's the thing. I want to take Naruto-kun as my apprentice when he graduates, of which I shall personally guarantee this time. Problem is, the Sandame says that if I did that, then there would be one less student and then there'd be the issue of an incomplete team. And most unluckily, there aren't any stand-ins. So my request for an apprentice was sadly denied. Anko explained as her grin became wider and wider until it seemed like the corners of her mouth were ready to tear open. And, the heck does that have to do with me? Sakura asked, not sure where this conversation was going. Well, if I can't take Naruto-kun as my apprentice, then he'll end up on Team 7. Which is traditionally made up of the class's members with the lowest and highest scores, and the top-ranked kunoichi. In essence, you, Naruto-kun, and Sasuke. The only solution to fixing this issue is, you need to vanish for a little while. Anko replied in a cheerful voice as she put her hands on her hips. Versus. Vanish. Sakura whimpered out in confusion, then out of nowhere, a pair of arms wrapped around her neck and a rag was placed over her mouth. She tried to scream and call for help, but nothing but muffled yelps came out. Anko sighed as she watched with a blank and dispassionate expression as she casually pulled out a stick of gum then popped into her mouth. Sakura's struggles grew quieter and quieter until finally she passed out with a small moan. Thanks for the help, Yugao-chan. Anko spoke to a Neko-masked Anbu with purple hair who was now carrying the pinket over her shoulders as though the girl were a sack of potatoes. If it's for Naruto-kun's benefit, then of course. What do you want me to do with the girl? I could chop her up into tiny pieces, have Hana-chan feed the meat to the dogs. No one will ever know. The Anbu captain offered, her voice having some sadistic pleasure to it. Thought about it. But she might be more useful alive. This little brat is Kazashi Haruno's kid, and his only meal ticket to get his grubby fingers into the Uchiha fortune. Might be handy to hang on to her for a while. Put her in that place, and I'll handle the rest from there. Anko replied as she walked towards her apartment with a devilish grin to her face. Send Naruto-kun my regards, was all the Anbu woman said before vanishing in a swirl of leaves with Sakura. After a few minutes of walking, the snake user arrived back at her apartment where Kurenai seemed to be gathering the last of her personal belongings, the crimson-eyed woman having a saddened expression on her face. Hi. She spoke in a quiet voice and awkwardly waved to Anko who waved back, the purple-haired Dango lover replying, Hey Nai-chan. I'm not mad at ya anymore. I know you meant well and only wanted the best for me. But, this stuff with Naruto-kun is something for me and him to settle. And, just earlier today, I learned that he actually cared for me in that way. So, Anko left the sentence hanging, knowing that Kurenai got the picture. I see. I am sorry for being so pushy earlier. I just didn't want you to make some foolish mistake and get hurt over it. I remember when you first came back after getting branded with the curse mark, you were so gloomy and despondent. You barely ate or slept after that, and I didn't want you to have a second experience. If you and Naruto-kun can have a life together, I truly wish you the best. The genjutsu user spoke with a small smile, hoping to make amends before departing. Ah, just like you. The protective big sister type. Well, don't worry about me Nai-chan. I can handle myself. I ain't some naive tween anymore. Anywho, you look out for yourself okay? And, I like to keep an open door policy, so if you need a hand or a place to crash, gimme a holler. The Dango lover offered and was then pulled into a hug by the crimson-eyed woman. The two sharing a chaste kiss before Kurenai picked up her belongings. I left my key on the kitchen counter with a bag of your favorite dango, call it a goodbye present. I'll be seeing you again soon Anko-chan. I hope you find a good roommate. With that said, the genjutsu user walked away feeling that they'd cleared the air. It was at this moment that Naruto had arrived and saw the form of Kurenai leaving, making a puzzled expression appear on his face as he approached his best friend and crush. Hey, did something happen between you and Kurenai-san? Naruto asked with a bit of concern as he placed a hand on Anko's shoulder. Nai-chan's leaving. She's moving in someplace with Asuma. Moving on with her life, she said. That kinda brings me to what I wanted to talk to you about earlier. I'm in the market for a new roommate, and I think you'd make a good candidate. She answered with a toothy smile, making Naruto's mouth drop open. Me? You want me to live with you? He asked, feeling his heart thundering in his chest from pure happiness at the thought of living with Anko. He could finally move out of his crummy apartment and into someplace way better, the same place as his crush no less. Sure I do. Hell, you practically live here anyway. She exclaimed and then patted his head affectionately. A somewhat fiendish grin came on her face as she continued to speak, I just have a few rules. 1. In our apartment together, we spend our days inside our home together in the. 2nd, you will refer to me from here on as Anko-sama or Sensei since I plan to take you as my apprentice. 3rd, I want you to live as happily as possible. If there's something you ever need to discuss with me, if you ever need anything, or if you just want a warm body to cuddle with, you just let me know. Deal. At that, he nodded his head and replied, "You've got a deal, Anko-chan. But, do we really need to be all the live long in our apartment together?" He asked with a large blush. He always knew that Anko was kinda perverted, but this seemed a bit excessive. "Ah, come on. My apartment, my rules. Besides, I cuddle with you in the, so what's the big deal? And one other thing. You used Chan, not Sama. Anko-sama's going to punish you now." She spoke in a jovial tone as she grabbed him and pushed his face into her chest, earning some muffled yells since he couldn't breathe between her s. Eventually he gave up his struggles and sighed between her s. This actually wasn't the bad kind of punishment, to be honest. Anko then raised an eyebrow as she felt some moisture build up in her cleavage as she pulled back and found that Naruto was crying tears of joy. "Anko-sama, I love you. Please be with me forever. Forever and always, Naruto-kun. I love you too. And if you go before I do, then I'll tell the grave digger that he'd better dig too." She promised him and ushered him inside the apartment, closing and locking the door behind him, and then immediately discarded all of her clothing, giving the blonde boy a clear view of her form. Sure, she had cuddled with him, but it was usually dark and he tried not to peek too much. "Get used to the view. You'll be seeing a lot of this, fine," she spoke bluntly and then smacked her own butt, making her round cheek shake a bit. "Extra thick," Naruto muttered as he dryly swallowed, feeling the blood rush to a certain place between his legs. "Damn straight, boy. Discard those clothes. You don't get to wear anything but a smile in my home. And if you need to do something about that boner, take it out in the bathroom or something. Till you strap on the headband, you're not legal age." She spoke with a wink, prompting the blonde boy to run into the bathroom to take care of some business. "Oh, this is going to be fun," she spoke to herself, knowing that it would be a joy to tease him. And judging from the tent in his crotch, he definitely wasn't some average Joe. Most likely he had his Uzumaki genes and the Kyuubi to thank for that. "Are we going too fast?" "Maybe. Yeah, definitely. But the Dango lover muttered with a happy smile, a certain spring in her step as she headed towards the kitchen to munch on the dango left behind by her now ex-roommate. Retrieving the bag of goodies, she plopped herself down on the couch and began to eat the sweet treats. With the little pink monkey girl out of the way, I just need to make sure Naruto-kun passes the exam this time. A little training in shadow clones should do the trick. Kakashi will apprentice that little Uchiha shit. And I'll have Naruto-kun for myself. It's a shame that Kushina-sama isn't here, hope I'm doing her proud." Meanwhile, Root Lab. Fu sighed to himself as he approached the bed where Kushina Uzumaki slept peacefully, unaware and trapped in a never-ending dream. The orange-haired man sighed since this would possibly be the 1000th time he's attempted to sneak into her mind and steal the secrets of Uzu. While it was unlikely he'd uncover anything worthwhile, it was still a necessary evil to keep Kushina in a comatose state since she was a threat to Konoha if not the entire elemental nations. "Hey there, sunshine," spoke a female voice, prompting Fu to turn around to see the form of Kushina sitting upright on the bed. The root agent's mouth opening and closing as wheezing sounds came from his mouth, for the evil Uzumaki had finally awoken. Then in a flash of movement, Kushina cut open his throat with a scalpel, making blood leak down his neck as he clutched at the wound, falling to the floor as he gasped and choked on his own blood. The evil Uzumaki's face scrunched up slightly as she asked, "You look familiar. Did I threaten to murder your family or something?" At her question, she only received some gurgling noises. She shrugged her shoulders then continued to speak, "Ah well. If I can't remember your name, I'm guessing that you're one of those unimportant throwaway type characters. I'll take an educated guess and say that you're the asshole that's been trying to mind rape me, learn some of Uzu's secrets, all on that Danzo guy's orders. And I've been pumped full of drugs to keep in dreamland. That about sum it up. She asked the orange-haired man, and finally with a final gasp, he fell to the floor having mercifully expired. I'll take that as a yes. Kushina replied as she got up from the slab and cracked her neck a few times. Then stretched her limbs to allow some of her joints to pop. And then glanced over at a mirror and asked herself, okay now. 3 very important questions. Has the Chucky franchise finally ended? How long have I been under? And most importantly, where is my child? Well, I know a certain old monkey that can help answer those questions. It had been just a little over a day since Naruto had moved in with Anko, taking what few worthwhile belongings he had to her, or their shared apartment. And now with the Genin exams coming tomorrow, it was time to train. Though there was currently a question that the blonde boy was still curious about. Remind me again, sensei, why must we be in our apartment at all times? Asked the form of Naruto Uzumaki as he followed his new roommate and sensei towards training ground 7 since the snake user had promised him a clone jutsu that was sure to help him finally pass the academy exam and flip the bird at Iruka in the process. This again? What? Too good of you or something? I told you already, it is training. Anko half yelled with a mocking laugh at the end, almost as if she knew something the blonde didn't. And how is strutting around involve training? And what if people come by and we're still? He asked in a deadpan tone since he had to fight off numerous nosebleeds when Anko got a little aggressive in her flirting. Sheesh. I sometimes forget that you're still a kid since you act all mature sometimes. We can just put on a henge to hide our then slip away into the bedroom for a minute to throw on some clothes. And there's a number of kunoichi in the world that dress provocatively to distract their enemies. And I'm one of them. If you can keep your cool and avoid getting distracted by an enemy kunoichi's body, then you'll have a bit easier time in battle with the kind of kunoichi that use seduction techniques. Anko explained as she crossed her arms, a confident grin on her face since Naruto nodded in understanding. Wait, does that seriously work? He asked while scratching at his whiskered cheeks, now having a better understanding on why so many kunoichi like Anko and Kurenai dressed in revealing or skimpy outfits. With killer bodies like theirs, it'd be hard not to get distracted. Not always, but you'd be surprised at the number of guys that think with what's between their legs instead of their heads. Sometimes works on women too if they're bisexual, lesbian, or have insecurities in their own bodies. The snake user answered with a small chuckle. Right, so what's the jutsu that you're going to be teaching me? Naruto asked, hoping to move things along, plus he was feeling both excited and impatient at the prospect of finally leaving the academy and learning a new jutsu. Okay, hold your horses. It's called the Shadow Clone Jutsu. Unlike the plain academy-taught clone jutsu which only produces illusionary decoys, the Shadow Clone Jutsu makes solid copies which make for good body doubles. One of the most useful aspects of the Shadow Clones are that when they dispel, whatever they learn is transferred to the caster. So this technique is good for scouting and infiltration. The downside is that it takes a lot of chakra to use, but with your unnatural chakra reserves, this technique should be a snap for you, she explained, earning a nod from her favorite blonde boy. Naruto cracked his knuckles a bit, very eager to start his training, then he paused as a question mark blinked over his head since a thought had just crossed his mind. Wait a sec. The Sandaime Hokage knows the Shadow Clone Jutsu, right? He's called the professor for knowing a large variety of techniques. Why doesn't he just use the clones to help do his paperwork? The blonde asked, voicing his thought on the subject which earned a chuckle from the snake mistress. Hey, you caught on too. Finally. I thought I was the only one to notice. My thoughts are, the old man's getting senile. She responded with a hearty laugh, making the Kyuubi Jinchuriki sweat drop a bit. You knew, and never said anything? He asked as his eyebrow twitched a bit, wondering why Anko withheld that piece of information from Hiruzen. Yeah, this might be petty, but it's kind of like payback for me. The Sandame's always been soft on his students, like my ex-sensei. Orochimaru became a missing nin. Tsunade's been wandering around drinking and gambling while, in mourning, for 15 years. As for student number 3, where the do I even begin? She spoke, though that last question seemed more to herself. With a shrug, she sighed and then gave a toothy smile as she spoke, Anyway, don't sweat the small stuff. Time to train. I'll show you the hand sign for the shadow clone jutsu and then you can give it a go, She paused as she looked up towards the sky, with Naruto also following her gaze. In the skies above Konoha were filled with hundreds or even thousands of numerous species of native birds were flying away from the village, almost as if they were fleeing from something since the panicked chirping and squawking sounds could be heard even at this distance. The hell is that about? Seems kinda like a bad omen. Naruto muttered. While he was no expert on bird behavior, it didn't take an expert to see that the birds fleeing in such numbers wasn't a good sign. Anko's eyes narrowed a bit as a tingling sensation ran up and down her spine. She's back. She finally came back. Anko whispered just loud enough for the blonde to hear her. The snake user recognized the signs and even now could feel in her gut and her heart that her mistress had finally returned. Who's back? Naruto asked, feeling a little bit nervous all of a sudden as he swallowed a lump in her throat. Don't be surprised if we get company later. Anko replied in a cryptic manner. She then clapped her hands together, snapping him to attention and spoke, "Don't worry about that stuff right now. Time to train." With that last shout, she began to show him the needed hand sign for the shadow clones. However, Naruto now had a feeling that something was coming his way, and his life would be flipped upside down. Meanwhile, in the office of the Hokage, Hiruzen was sitting behind his desk smoking from his favored pipe. Standing in front of him was a man with pink hair who was red in the face and was shouting at the top of his lungs in outrage. "My daughter is missing and you aren't doing anything about it. That snake whore was seen and heard threatening my precious Sakura just yesterday at the academy, and then my daughter vanished. That Anko is obviously suspicious." Kazashi shouted angrily with his hands clenched tightly into fists as he slammed them onto the desk. "I have some of my Anbu investigating the matter. Anko will be questioned, of course. Just like the many other people who all loathe the Haruno name because of you, Kazashi-san." The Sandame replied flatly as he blew some smoke from his nostrils. The ex-shinobi's eyebrow twitched a bit, and he grit his teeth, growling out, "There's something you wish to say to me, Hiruzen." At this question, the Hokage's eyes hardened as he put down his pipe and rose to his full height to stare down the head of the civilian council. "That is, Hokage-sama, to you. And there are a great many things I very much desire to say, and most of them cannot be spoken in polite conversation. But above all, I wish Kushina killed you all those years ago, when she exposed you for accepting UAL favors from captured enemy Kunoichi. You, Kazashi, have become a parasite much like my former student Orochimaru. Leeching off of the lives of others to feed your own ego. You have trampled on many lives with your business as a loan shark. Reportedly, a number of your clients have committed suicide due to their debts to your business. And many more continue to suffer with you as the civilian council's head. For years, I have maintained the peace of the village, yet you seek to continue to undermine the ninjas that work hard, every day to protect that peace in this village. And now here you are, now making demands of me when you need my shinobi, when it is your own sins that have likely damned your child." Hiruzen spoke with pure hatred for this, leech standing before him. Before their argument could escalate further, a voice cut through the tense atmosphere. "Hello, boys," spoke a very familiar voice, prompting both men to turn in the direction it came from, and saw the form of Kushina Uzumaki herself, standing in the doorway with a rust-covered katana resting on her shoulder. "Couldn't help but overhear you two. Kazashi, you actually managed to procreate and make a daughter. Thought I castrated you by squishing your peanut-sized testicles under my feet when I kicked you out of the shinobi corps. Next time I'll be sure to finish the job. She spoke with a broad smile as she approached the pictures of the Hokage hanging off the wall. The two men opened and closed their mouths, as if they were both fish out of water, both unable to speak due to pure shock. But Kazashi was the first to speak as he pointed an accusatory finger at the crimson-haired woman and shouted, "You. It was you. It's because of you that my daughter went missing." Kushina chuckled a bit and then, accidentally, knocked off the picture of the Shadaime from the wall with the tip of her sword before speaking, "Don't know what you're talking about. I only just arrived back in Konoha about an hour ago. The Chunin manning the gate's guard post, Kotetsu and Izumi, were very accommodating to me. Must have been crushing pretty hard on me. And trust me, Kazashi. I wouldn't waste my time kidnapping whatever brat that slithered out of yours and Mebuki's collective filth. I'd just kill you and get the job done. Now, shoo. Go away. The grown-ups are about to have a lovely chat." She spoke at the end with a sweet voice that sent chills up the men's spines. Seeing that Kazashi still hadn't left yet, she pointed the tip of her rust-caked sword at him and spoke in an even sickeningly sweeter voice, "So silly of me. I shouldn't be asking. I'm telling you to off and get out of my sight." This time, the message got clear across and the pink-haired man fled the office as quickly as possible, causing the doors to slam behind him in his haste. Remind me to pour a very big jug of bleach down his throat. Now then, Hiruzen, you've gotten so old. It's a miracle that you haven't kicked the bucket or that Konoha has not been burnt to the ground with it being in such a state. Kushina remarked with a small giggle and then, accidentally, knocked off the picture of the Nadaime. What do you mean, in such a state? And, perhaps more importantly, where have you been these past 13 years? The Sandaime asked as he gripped the arms of his chair, almost shrinking back into his seat to look as tiny and non-threatening as possible. The crimson-haired woman cupped her chin in thought before answering, 13 years, Has it really been that long? To cut a long story short, I was kept prisoner in a medically induced coma. Found myself in some repurposed lab with one of Danzo's cronies trying to rape my mind. And when I commented about the state of Konoha, I was passing by and visiting some of my old haunts and stomping grounds, and took note of the emptiness of the Uchiha district where Makoto-chan lived. Don't tell me, with myself and Minato gone, Fugaku finally sacked up and tried to pull some half-assed coup. At her questioning, the Sandaime couldn't help but smirk a little. Your abilities of perception are as strong as ever. Yes. Fugaku was planning a coup. If he had succeeded, then the other shinobi villages might have taken advantage of the infighting within Konoha and a fourth ninja war would have started, one which Konoha may not have survived. Itachi Uchiha took the secret mission of stopping the coup, but there were complications. The only survivor was Itachi's younger brother Sasuke. L can only theorize that Danzo had ordered Itachi to murder the entire clan as a whole, instead of simply Fugaku and his conspirators. But I never had any proof to support this theory. Speaking of Danzo, are you certain that his people were keeping you prisoner? The Sandaime asked as he laced his fingers together. Kushina smirked as she knocked off Hiruzen's own picture off the wall and then tossed a sealing scroll onto the Hokage's desk. Pretty sure. That scroll has the severed head of some orange-haired prick. Have Inoichi do that necrophile mind walk shit or whatever to see his memories. Might have some info to finally nail the old bastard. Makoto was confirmed to be amongst the dead, yes? She asked, earning a grave nod from the Sandaime. Kushina rubbed her temples for a moment and let out a sad sigh. Goddamn it, Makoto. Still, I guess she could never raise a hand against her own children. Even if they're murdering her. A fond smile graced Kushina's lips as she remembered the good times she had with her Uchiha friend. Then the evil Uzumaki's face hardened as she used her rust-covered blade to slice the Hokage desk in two, making Hiruzen yelp and cover his face with his arms since he believed Kushina had intended to kill him, but then he lowered his arms when he realized he was still alive, making a sigh of relief escape his lips. I think it's time for a change in leadership. Sandaime-sama, I'll be taking over as the Hokage. Time for me to right some wrongs, and make up for lost time. Kushina stated with a large and almost bestial grin that made the Hokage sweat nervously. I'm not sure if you're a suitable candidate. Hiruzen muttered while Kushina then stabbed the tip of her katana straight through the picture of Minato Namikaze, her late husband and the Yondaime Hokage. Her face now a blank mask as she glanced between the now ruined picture and the aged Hokage. Why's that? I only gave up on being Hokage because I was pregnant with Naruto-kun. By now, Naruto-kun is a teenager, and I missed so much that I can't ever be his mother, but I can still try to be a part of his life and try to make things right. That aside, I am far superior to Minato. I have more power in just my pinky toe than he did in his entire body. Kushina spoke, completely unafraid to boast of her raw power. And unlike many that bragged about their strength, the evil Uzumaki could easily back up her words. Hiruzen felt himself slowly melting beneath her gaze as he replied nervously, that is to say, you certainly aren't lacking in power or skill, but you aren't exactly mentally sound. You are infamously known to behave in a highly destructive and erratic manner. When he finished speaking, he was expecting the crimson-haired Kunoichi to lash out in anger. But instead her lips curled up into a smile and she began to laugh almost hysterically. She even clutched at her sides as she wheezed for air when her laughter finally began to die down. She then pinched Hiruzen's cheek, making the aged Hokage wince in pain, and spoke in a voice that seemed more appropriate for gently scolding a child. Oh Hiruzen, you make me laugh. You've seemed to have gotten soft in your old age. I am mentally unsound. Seems a bit of a stretch in comparison to a certain pasty-faced pedophile who reduced his own existence to that of a parasite for the sake of a bastardized half-baked form of immortality. After I was kidnapped by Kumo to be used for their bloodline breeding program, raping program, I promised myself that I'd never be a victim ever again. That I wouldn't lose a second village like I had lost Uzu. So I trained and trained, even forsaking my own humanity to become akin to a demon. I committed the most horrible and gruesome atrocities to put the fear of Kami into the hearts of Konoha's enemies, and thus, the evil Uzumaki was born. I did the hard things, the worst things. The kind of things that would have made anyone else crack under the stress and trauma, so that every single man, woman, and child can sleep peacefully and blissfully unaware of what really happens on the battlefield. For the sake of this Kami-forsaken village, I think it's in your best interest to name me the next Hokage, pronto. Wouldn't want to give me a reason to turn against Konoha, yes? She asked at the end, pinching even harder to the point it seemed like she was going to rip off a chunk of flesh. Hiruzen swallowed hard, knowing that this woman might be the most dangerous kind of ninja since Madara. And it would be a terrible idea to make an enemy of her. It would seem he was now stuck with the choice of accepting the rule of a probable tyrant, or refusing and potentially destroying the village he had worked so hard to protect. Finally, he caved as he replied reluctantly, all right. You shall be the godime. The mantle of Hokage, the responsibilities of leadership, and the consequences of your rule shall be yours. Nodding in acceptance, the crimson-haired woman released him, making him rub his now sore cheek. If Kushina could maintain some measure of restraint, then her being Hokage wouldn't be the worst thing. Grand. Now comes the most important subject of the day. What of my child? Where is he now? What was his childhood like? Tell me everything. And if you dare lie to me, and I discover the truth from my child, then I'll be very happy to shove this here sword right where the sun doesn't shine. You know why I like to use weapons covered in filth and rust. If wounds caused by rusty objects or weapons are not cleaned and treated properly, then it can lead to serious infection, even death. Most especially if one isn't up to date on their tetanus shots. When's the last time you got yours? Kushina asked, and threatened in a not-so-subtle manner, which caused the Hokage to sweat nervously since he couldn't remember. Word has recently spread that both Anko Mitarashi and Naruto have just begun living together, and are likely romantically involved. Much of Naruto's childhood was a lonely existence, and on occasion a stupid and/or drunken civilian would assault or bully him. But Anko took it upon herself to protect him over the years and helped greatly in relieving his loneliness, even going out of her way to make sure she stayed and took missions within the village as much as possible. I do not know how, but somehow Naruto-kun's status as the current Jinchuriki was leaked to the general public. And with the village still in chaos after the Kyuubi attack, I was unable to find the leak before whoever the mole was able to cover their tracks. So I made it a law making it forbidden to discuss Naruto's situation, especially to the younger generation. However, it seems in my efforts to protect him, I likely did more harm than good in the long run of things. Hiruzen explained, rubbing his temples with a tired sigh at his failure. Tried to make the best of a bad situation. Guess even being Hokage, you can't control the hearts and minds of the people. What about Jiraiya? Minato begged me down on his knees to allow the frog Sannin to be my child's godfather. The evil Uzumaki asked with narrowed eyes, already knowing that she wasn't going to like the answer. Jiraiya has had absolutely no contact with Naruto. I doubt the boy even knows he has a godfather. Hiruzen answered bluntly, and then felt his heart race as the atmosphere became dark and oppressive. Like the very air itself was pressing down on him and threatening to crush him. A small, tch, sound came from Kushina, causing the windows to shatter into thousands of pieces. I always knew that pervy little frog couldn't be trusted. I'll be sure to give him some deluxe grade treatment the next time I see him. She vowed angrily and then took a deep breath to relax herself, which finally relieved some of the tense atmosphere within the Hokage's office. Sandame-sama, I want you to call an emergency council meeting tonight, so that I may officially be announced as the new Godime, and I can begin whipping this decrepit village back into shape. Time to take things in a new direction. Kushina spoke as she looked out over the village through the now broken windows, a small giggle escaping her lips. Certainly. I can get everything together by 8 o'clock. What will you be doing in the meantime? The Sandame asked as he stood up and reached for the telephone to begin making the needed preparations. I'm going to be visiting my son. There's a lot that I need to explain to him. Anko's still living in the same apartment, right? She asked as she sheathed her blade, the Hokage nodding in response to her question, which made the crimson-haired woman smirk, since that meant it'd be easier to find one of her old apprentices. She then sauntered off towards the door with a spring in her step, but before leaving she turned around and spoke, "Don't forget about the head in that scroll I gave you. Inoichi might find some pretty damning evidence in that dipshit's noggin. Might finally give you some ammo to nail Danzo." Hiruzen nodded in understanding and gratitude for the reminder, prompting Kushina to take her leave towards Anko's home. It was finally time to make some amends. Her stomach then growled a bit, making her realize she hadn't eaten anything since first awakening. Might as well get some ramen-fueled courage before seeing her son. Especially since for the first time in her existence, Kushina felt one true regret. Not being the mother her child deserved or needed. Time for some Ichiraku to eat away some of her sorrows before the talk with her son. Later. Training Ground 7. Niece. Very nice. Seems you have the jutsu down pat. If Iruka fails you for this one, I swear I'll kill him. Anko spoke in a tone filled with pride as she gave the blonde boy a thumbs up. The whiskered teen was covered in sweat since he had been making clones by the dozens without stopping. A smile formed on his face as he nodded in gratitude. Thanks Anko-sama. There's no way I can fail the genin exam this time. I can't wait to become your apprentice. The blonde exclaimed as he pumped his fist in the air. Then suddenly his stomach began to growl, making him blush a bit since the moment was now ruined. The purple-haired woman chuckled as she shook her head a bit. Seems like someone needs some lunch. Well, I think you earned some Ichiraku today for your hard work. Just remember, when you strap on the headband, the real work starts. She spoke, trying to sound cool. Though it seemed Naruto currently had stars in his eyes at the mentioning of Ichiraku. Am I interrupting anything? Spoke a masculine voice, making the two pariahs turn and spot the form of the copy ninja Kakashi. The masked man's lone eye fixated on his little orange book. Nah, not really. We were just finishing up here. Something you need? Anko asked as she crossed her arms, not really in the mood to deal with Kakashi at the moment. Or at any, to be honest. You hear the news. Apparently Sakura Haruno is missing and Kazashi's been accusing you. I saw him leaving the Hokage mansion in a big hurry, looked white as a sheet. He must be really concerned about his daughter. Kakashi spoke in a blank tone of voice, making it difficult to tell how he really felt on the subject. Please. That crooked loan shark doesn't care about anything except himself and his piggy bank. One time I overheard Mebuki rambling at the bar. She was so slobbering drunk, that she was wailing about her lack of a life and how her so-called husband's been grooming his daughter to be some bimbo gold digger. Anko retorted with a smirk, feeling almost sorry for the trophy wife Mebuki. I'm just gonna go. We'll be seeing you at Ichiraku Anko-sama. Naruto spoke, before departing since he didn't want to get in the way. And he wanted to get to the ramen stand as quickly as possible to quiet the rumbling of his belly. Sure. Go on ahead. I'll catch up with ya. Tell the Ichirakus to put it on my tab. Anko spoke dismissively, her hand making a small shooing motion as he left the training ground, leaving the two ninjas alone on the field. What do you really want, Kakashi? Anko asked bluntly, her eyes narrowing a bit since Kakashi's arrival seemed kind of convenient. Almost like he purposefully arrived once she was finished Naruto's training for the day. Couldn't help but notice something. Word is that you publicly threatened Sakura at the academy, then shortly thereafter she just up and disappeared. Not to mention, with the Genin exams around the corner, there's now one less student, so there's an imbalance of teams. Now I'm being asked to apprentice Sasuke Uchiha since Team 7 can't be a full team without Sakura, while you have been repeatedly requesting Naruto to be your apprentice. Kakashi explained as he looked up from his smut-filled book, his lone eye narrowing. And, Naruto-kun needs me to be his teacher. Even if Team 7 was put together, you'll no doubt spend all your time kissing up to Sasuke to even bother training your other two students. And even then, you'll just be wasting their time with teamwork exercises. Anko spoke flatly, then she decided to walk away and join up with Naruto before her mood was soured even further. He needs you, more like you seem to need him. Seems to me that your relationship with him might turn a bit sour due to your obsession. Kakashi spoke in a whisper, only for Anko to turn around and march over to him. Snatching the Icha book from his hands before he could even react. The do you know about love? You just waltz around reading this trashy smut instead of looking for a meaningful relationship. Don't you dare judge me when you don't know shit. Anko stated and then started to rip out the pages of the book, making Kakashi freeze up as his lone eye widened to the size of a dinner plate. The snake mistress then threw the book to the ground and stomped on it, grinding it beneath her foot until the spine broke. That was an autographed, limited edition. Kakashi muttered almost brokenly as he sank to his knees, his lone eye filled with deep despair. The snake user then grabbed his Jonin vest and pulled him towards her, till his face was but inches from her own. And another thing, you don't get to play the concerned guy act. You were Minato's student. You're probably the closest thing to an Uncle Naruto-kun has, and yet you have your head up your own fawning over some little Uchiha brat. If you try to get between me and my Naruto-kun, I will crush that damn Sharingan eyeball you're so proud of. She warned him, and then released him from her grip, allowing him to mourn over his ruined porn. Stuffing her hands inside of her pockets, Anko marched off to meet up with Naruto. And at the same time, she made a mental note to swing by Sakura's prison to feed her. The pinkett wouldn't be of much use if she was dead, assuming she even had a use. Ichiraku Ramen Stand. At long last, Naruto arrived at his destination, his mouth watering at the thought of Ichiraku Ramen, and the smell of it made his stomach growl all the more. As he was about to enter, he noticed that the closed sign was up, making the Kyuubi Jinchuriki tilt his head in confusion. He leaned down a bit and saw a lone woman sitting alone slurping down ramen like she hadn't eaten anything in years, and he could even see the Ichirakus busying themselves with cooking ramen. Wanting to know why the closed sign was up, the blonde called out, "Oi! Old man Tuki. Ayame Nichan. What the hell gives? Why are you closed when there's someone in there?" When he finished yelling, a small yelp came from inside the stand as Ayame Ichiraku came out from the back and then placed her hands on his shoulders to quickly turn him around and push him away from the stand. "Sorry, Naruto-kun. But a very important customer just arrived and specifically told us not to let anyone else inside till she was finished. I'll spot you some free ramen later, okay?" Ayame spoke in a very hurried voice, like she was trying to make the boy leave as quickly as possible. Before the whiskered teen could even protest, a female voice called out from inside the stand, "Oi! Let him in. He can join me." At her order, Ayame let go of Naruto and quickly ushered him inside, making the blonde wonder why the ramen waitress was acting so nervous and jittery. When he entered the stand, he saw what could only be described as one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen, especially with her vibrant crimson hair. On a scale of 1 to 10, she'd definitely be a 12. There was even a pleasant aroma about her consisting of foxes and ramen. "Sit down, Naruto-kun." The mystery woman spoke, gesturing to a stool next to her, prompting the blonde to accept the invitation as he sat right beside her. His eyes widened a bit when he saw all the empty ramen bowls pushed to the side, showing that she had a love for Ichiraku that rivaled his own. "How do you know my name? And how did you even know I was just outside?" he asked, feeling like he knew this woman from somewhere. A feeling of familiarity overcoming him as he couldn't help but take in her luscious form, a small blush forming on his cheeks. "Sensed your chakra. It shined like a beacon, due in no small part to your burden. Makes you stand out. And I think I'd know the name of my child," she responded as she slurped up some ramen, her face nothing more than a calm facade. Though on the inside, within her mind, a chibi Kushina was panicking as sirens blared and red strobe lights flashed. "Your child? Just who the hell are you?" Naruto asked, almost dreading the answer as his mind ground to a halt. He wanted to deny it, he really did. But he needed to hear it from her own mouth. "Tuki. Ayame. Why don't you take a break for a bit?" the crimson-haired woman asked, prompting the father and daughter pair to nod and slip into the back to give the two some privacy. The stranger's violet eyes then met Naruto's sapphire blue orbs, her eyes filled with sadness and longing as she continued to speak. "There's no easy way to say this, so I shall just have to say it. My name is Kushina Uzumaki, and I am your mother. I gave birth to you on October 10th, and I was the Kyuubi container before you." After her introduction, the blonde felt a pit in his stomach and his mouth and throat seemed to dry up. Something in him snapped as he wrapped his hands around her neck and screamed, "Where were you? Where were you all these years? Why did you come back now?" he demanded, numerous emotions flooding him. Anger, pain, sadness, frustration and confusion. Normally, if someone put their hands around Kushina's throat, she would have curb-stomped them, but this was her child. She grabbed his wrists and then gently pulled his hands away as she replied, "I know you're angry. You must have been so alone. I can't even imagine how much you must have craved for the love and affection of a parent. And now that I've dropped in out of nowhere, you aren't sure what to feel except for rage. To answer your question, I was being held prisoner in a drug-induced coma. I only recently came to, and made an immediate beeline for Konoha." When she finished her explanation, the whiskered teen stared heatedly into her eyes, scanning for any signs of lying, but all he could find was a deep well of sorrow and regret, but at the same time, deep and unconditional love. "You're really my mom. And you were held prisoner?" he asked almost hesitantly. "Need more proof I'm your mother? Come on. I have a witness that may answer some of your questions. Now close your eyes for a moment." She replied as closed her eyes, prompting the blonde to do the same, and when he reopened them, he found that the surroundings had changed from Ichiraku's humble ramen stand to that of a sewer. The air felt oppressive, full of anger and hatred. But there was another emotion, desire maybe. What is this place? He asked as he stared down the darkened hallway, and then realized his hand was loosely entwined in the hand of Kushina as she gently guided him towards some unforeseen destination. This is your mindscape. A space in the subconscious mind of a Jinchuriki where the Biju reside. Have you ever met the Kyuubi before? She asked at the end out of curiosity, though she felt like she already knew the answer since he didn't even know her name. I tried a few times to talk to the Kyuubi when I put two and two together about my status as its container. But I could never get in contact. Wait. You said earlier that you were the previous container. He replied and quickly put it together that the tailed beast would be able to provide testimony to support Kushina's tale. Yup. I'm going to introduce you. Kushina answered as they neared a gate-like structure with the tag labeled, seal, on it. Inside was the form of the Kyuubi no Kitsune in all its glory, its head resting on its front legs as it seemed to be asleep, until a deep and rumbling voice spoke, I thought I caught your scent once more Kushina-san. I should have known a simple flesh wound like that couldn't have killed you. The voice of the tailed beast then let out a deep chortling sound, obviously laced with a dark sense of humor. I wouldn't call being pierced through the stomach by one of your claws a flesh wound, seeing as how my body was severely weakened by the birthing process and with you being ripped out of me and my regenerative abilities were pretty much shot at that time. Kurama, may I introduce your current container, my child, Naruto Uzumaki. The crimson-haired woman spoke and then gestured to the blonde boy who nervously waved, already seeing that the two had some kind of friendly relationship. I see. Welcome, Kit. I am Kurama. You have my blessing to grovel at my feet and worship me. The beast spoke, its deep voice making it difficult to tell if it was joking or not. Though it was obvious the beast had a high opinion of itself. Kurama, we've talked about this. Your voice tends to throw people off in your bestial form. Kushina spoke with a sigh, gesturing at the Biju's large-sized body to emphasize her point, making a small sweat drop form on the fox as it sighed in some annoyance. Very well then, but I shall freely admit, your soft and squishy human forms fail to capture my true glory, and they are far too cramped for my liking. The fox grumbled as it was then engulfed in a bright flash of light. When the human's eyes cleared, Naruto gawked when he spotted a woman with gold and crimson hair, giving it a flame-like appearance. Her skin was a dark caramel color with the same whisker marks on her own cheeks with two fangs jutting from her upper lip, and her body was that of a perfect hourglass frame and a bust that could put a certain busty Sanin to shame, and there were 9 swishing rust-orange fox tails behind her. For clothes she wore a simple black kimono with a crimson sash and she wore no footwear. Overall, Kurama's human form could best be described as exotic, bestial, mature, and dignified. The air around her consisting of grace and poise, like a noble or a priestess. She blinked her dark crimson eyes a few times and then spoke, I despise this utterly hideous form. How do you humans stand to walk on 2 legs? This is completely undignified. Though Naruto-san seems to approve of it. He must have severely low standards. The Kyuubi no Kitsune spoke, pointing out the fact that the blonde was visibly ogling her form. In spite of your opinions Kurama, many would find your human form to be very attractive. And it seems my son is no exception. But enough about that. I came here for 2 important reasons. Kurama, would you please support and cooperate with Naruto-kun as you did with me? And would you please help show yours and my memories of that fateful night? Kushina asked with a warm smile, though Kurama knew all too well that one doesn't say no to Kushina. Ever. Very well. But as usual my services won't be for free. Now, both of you grab a hold of one of my tails. Fair warning to you, Naruto-san, this will not be a pleasant experience for you. Kurama warned the blonde as 2 of her fox tails extended towards both him and Kushina through the bars of the kitsune's prison. With a slow nod he grabbed onto the tip of the tail, and then felt his whole body freeze up as he witnessed the events of his own birth. The masked man taking him hostage and kidnapping Kushina. The forced release of Kurama and being put into a destructive trance that caused many deaths within Konoha. He saw his mother comforting him with a small toy, even as she barely clung to life. And then, he witnessed his parents' final moments. Tears filled his eyes when his mother tried to offer words of comfort, wisdom and encouragement to him, but he also felt anger that his own father, the Yondaime, forced the burden of being a Jinchuriki onto him. Though to be somewhat fair, they didn't have very many options as time was running out and they were both running on fumes at that point. And finally, from his own eyes, he saw the forms of Anbu in blank masks carrying the body of his dead mother away. By now, it was obvious that Kushina spoke the truth. I see. So that's what really happened. At first, I wanted to be angry at you, to blame you for not being around to raise me, but I can't anymore. It wasn't your fault you were taken. I can't hold you at fault when you didn't do anything wrong. I just wish you could have woken up a lot sooner. Naruto spoke as he rubbed away some tears in his eyes, with Kurama watching on stoically while Kushina had a downcast look on her face. The Uzumaki woman then pulled her child into a warm embrace and replied, "Me too. I would give anything to be able to turn back the clock and change the events of that night. But even that is beyond my power. I was never able to be your mother. At least not for the long term, but may I still be a part of your life. We can still be friends, and I promise to support you unconditionally, doing everything I can to make amends." At her words, he returned the hug, wrapping his arms around her as he answered, "I'd like that. At least, now I know you never abandoned me. You were taken. The people who took you, the guy in the mask, they're the ones to blame for everything that went wrong with my life." Naruto spoke at the end with some anger in his voice. "I already know who kidnapped me, and I shall be taking care of him soon enough. But still, the masked man is somewhat of a mystery. Only one Uchiha in history has been able to control Kurama. Oi, Kurama, was that guy in the mask really Madara Uchiha?" The evil Uzumaki asked with a raised eyebrow, since that question had been bugging her for some time now. Doubtful. His Sharingan was pretty strong, but his chakra lacked the same intensity as Madara. Not to mention the man in the mask smelled differently. He smelled wrong, corrupted, like rot. His scent both invoked some familiarity and much anger. But no, I sincerely doubt that was actually Madara himself. Kurama replied as she slowly blinked her eyes, a frown on her face suggesting that the very mentioning of Uchihas, especially Madara, put a bad taste in the kitsune's mouth. "I see. An imposter then. Naruto-kun, why don't you stay here and bond with Kurama? We can talk more later, and I have lots of things to take care of." Kushina spoke and patted her son on the head as she gently broke their embrace together. "Right. You mentioned that you know who took you. And bond with her?" Naruto asked at the end, glancing over to the kitsune who seemed to be staring down at him like he were a roach. "Yes. Bond. Take it from me, it is far better to cooperate with your tenant than treat her with disdain. Kurama's not a bad person, but certain life experiences and dealings with humankind has left her bitter and jaded. So, do try and get along." With that said, Kushina vanished in a flash of light, leaving her son alone with the Biju. "Allow me to make this clear, if you wish for my cooperation and services, you must provide some accommodations." The kitsune spoke bluntly as she lowered herself to the floor and gracefully sat on her knees. The whiskered teen turned towards her and rubbed his head a bit in confusion. "What kind? You're kinda stuck in my mindscape, so there's not that much I can do," he replied, making the Biju shake her head in annoyance. "Very well. For a start, I demand a more visually pleasing home. This sewer setting is exceptionally depressing," she responded, gesturing out towards the darkened halls where the sounds of water dripping could be heard. "Oh, right. I see your point. How about this? If this is my mind, I can set the rules right. What if I gave you permission to make whatever changes you want in here?" The blonde asked, hoping his offer might help get in the kitsune's good graces. However, her face was rather difficult to read since it seemed to show very little emotion. But then a small smile graced her lips as she replied, "I accept your generous offer. At least this way, I can change and decorate according to my own tastes. I may soon grow to tolerate your presence more. And if you continue to please me, I would happily accept you as my slave." At that last statement, the blonde couldn't help but sweat drop a little bit. Not entirely sure if being enslaved to the Kyuubi would actually be a good thing. Now then, let's see about changing this dreary sewer. Kurama spoke as she clapped her hands, and then the scenery changed to nothing but a white void to erase everything in sight and to provide her with a blank canvas to play around with. Real world. Ichiraku's. Kushina's eyes fluttered open as she awoke in the real world again, with the Ichirakus themselves standing behind the counter as they had patiently waited for her awakening. The crimson-haired woman smiled and spoke, "Thank you for your time and patience. I shall be leaving you so you may continue your business as normal. I'll come by later to settle my bill." At her words, the father and daughter pair nodded in appreciation as Kushina scooped up the seemingly asleep form of her son and carried him outside, only to be met by the waiting form of Anko Mitarashi. "Yo, I knew you were back. Ichiraku's wouldn't let me in, so I decided to wait. Were you doing that Biju meditation thing with Naruto-kun?" The purple-haired woman asked with a cheeky grin. "I did. Sorry if I kept you waiting." The evil Uzumaki apologized and gave a sheepish smile, rubbing the back of her head. The snake user then gently retrieved Naruto from his mother's grip, held him close in her arms. "Ah, don't worry about it. How'd it go with Naruto-kun?" The snake mistress asked as she comfortingly rubbed the boy's back, planting a soft kiss on his cheek. "He was angry at first. But once I showed him the memories pertaining to that night, he came to an understanding. The quick version is that a Sharingan user in a mask sabotaged the resealing process after Naruto-kun's birth. Then once Kyuubi-san was sealed into my son, I was kidnapped and held prisoner in a coma." The evil Uzumaki answered, summarizing the reason she vanished to her former pupil. "That explains a lot actually, since your body was never found." Anko remarked with a frown. She then sighed and asked her mentor, "So what now? You coming back with me to my place?" The crimson-haired woman looked towards the Hokage Tower and replied, "No. It won't be very long until word spreads about my return. I need to tie up some loose ends before they slip away." "Anko-chan, there anything I should know since I have only recently returned?" Anko thought for a moment as she cupped her chin and then answered, "Yeah. Not sure if you'll consider this important, but I kidnapped Kazashi's kid, Sakura." At her statement, the former Jinchuriki's face fell into a blank state, like she were asking, "Are you serious? And why in Kami's green earth would you bother kidnapped Kazashi's ill-bred offspring?" Kushina asked, feeling that was a waste of time and effort. "Hey, I had a good reason. In the academy, that Sakura bitch is the top kunoichi. I knew she'd be put on Team 7 along with that Sasuke brat and with Naruto-kun. And with Kakashi being a Sharingan user, he'd be a shoo-in for Team 7 sensei. So I removed Sakura from the equation, and with her gone, Team 7 would be incomplete and I could freely take Naruto-kun as an apprentice without fear of losing him to some incompetent and lazy-ass teacher. Not to mention, Sakura was known to have been abusive to poor Naruto-kun during his time at the academy." Anko explained, prompting her teacher to nod in understanding. "I see. After Kakashi's failings during the war, and his lack of growth as a person and a ninja, I wouldn't trust him with my son either. Come to think of it, your kidnapping of the girl might help me get one over on Kazashi and humiliate him. Take Naruto-kun home, I have a council meeting to attend. By the way, is this Sakura girl attractive?" Kushina asked at the end out of curiosity. The Dango lover rolled her eyes a bit and replied, "She's not exactly hideous, but she's not a head-turner either. She's really lacking in body proportions. Likely due to dieting and lack of kunoichi training. She's being held at the usual place." At this, the crimson-haired woman adopted a thinking pose and then nodded as if she had reached a decision. She then departed towards the Hokage tower, leaving Anko to take the blonde boy to her apartment. He would need his rest before the genin exams tomorrow. And with Kushina herself back in Konoha, there was absolutely no way she would accept the teacher's bias towards the whiskered teen. Konoha Council Chambers. Hiruzen sat down quietly as the members of the various councils gathered, whispering amongst themselves as to why this meeting was called, and so far, only Inoichi was privy to the details since he scanned the head of Fuyamanaka, who was confirmed to be a direct subordinate of Danzo. The Warhawk being guilty of conspiracy, clan genocide, kidnapping, illegal experimentation, and a number of other charges that rivaled if not surpassed Orochimaru's listed crimes. And Kazashi was obviously aware of Kushina's return but seemed to have kept quiet on the subject, likely out of self-preservation. The Sandame was sure to keep a very close eye on his old rival, and even had a number of Anbu hidden throughout the chambers if things got out of hand. Sensing the presence of one of his Anbu approaching, he turned slightly and saw Neko leaning over to whisper into his ear, "She has arrived," prompting the aged Hokage to nod as he banged his gavel, calling for the attention of the councils. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. I called this emergence meeting for two very important reasons. Firstly, I am pleased to announce that I am now stepping down as Hokage, and I shall be shortly introducing to you the new Godime," Hiruzen announced, earning a series of claps from the councils, excluding Danzo and Kazashi. The latter of which seemed to be paling until he was as white as a sheet, already guessing who the Godime would be, and the pink-haired man's torment brought a feeling of satisfaction to the Sandame. The second reason is that due to newfound evidence, we can now expose a traitor in our midst. Danzo Shimura, I name you as the traitor, Hiruzen announced, pointing an accusatory finger at the form of the War Hawk, causing all eyes to turn that gaze at the so-called cripple. Me, Hiruzen, what evidence could you possibly possess? The founder of Root asked with a smug expression, though he knew that he wouldn't have been so openly accused if Hiruzen didn't have something solid. With a snap of the Hokage's fingers, Inoichi reached under the table for a moment, and then placed a large container on the table for all to see. The floating head of Fuyamanaka visible through the glass window. There's my evidence. Inoichi has already gone through your subordinates' memories. We know everything now. The orphanages you own to continue a fresh supply of recruits, the experiments on your mutated arm and the implanted Sharingan eye, your involvement in destroying the entire Uchiha clan instead of the guilty few, your dealings with Orochimaru. All of it. You're finished, Danzo, and by the power vested in me as the Sandame, I hereby pass the means of execution to the new Godime," Hiruzen announced coldly, his face hardening into a steely mask which lacked any emotion. Before Danzo could even open his mouth, a rust-covered blade pierced through his stomach and in one swift motion, his bandaged and mutated arm was ripped clean out of its socket and tossed onto the table. From behind Danzo's seat emerged the form of Kushina Uzumaki, who was grinning widely at her entrance, and at finally being able to gut the War Hawk. "Evening, Mr. Gloomy Gus. Did ya miss me? My sword certainly didn't. You." Danzo choked out as blood began to spill from his mouth. "Yup, me," was Kushina's curt response as she grabbed the old man by the throat and chucked him onto the table, making a loud thudding noise as she sidled up next to the War Hawk's form and pulled out a kunai with a flick of her wrist. "If I remember correctly, I promised that if you ever interfered with me or my family, that I'd rip your guts out. Well, time to pay the piper, old man." With her intent made clear, Kushina plunged the kunai into the wound left behind by her sword, and then dragged the kunai downward to cut open Danzo's belly. The crimson-haired woman then grabbed at the ribcage and pulled it apart with one strong tug, making a loud snapping noise. Contrary to what a lot of people may think, the human body has a lot more guts than you'd think. So it can take a while to pull it all out. Kushina spoke in a casual manner and then started to dig her hands around in her current victim's belly and started to pull out the intestines and toss them in the space between the root leader's legs. The scene made numerous members of the civilian council turn green in the face before puking all over themselves or more mercifully passing out and fainting. Think of it like pulling out a long, wet and very squishy garden hose of some kind. The evil Uzumaki spoke as she continued yanking out the intestines, her hands, face, and clothes soaked in blood. All the while, Danzo writhed in pain as he was drowned in his own blood. With his mutated arm gone, there was only one means of escape. He'd have to use Shisui's implanted eye in his concealed eye socket to use Izanagi and escape. While he didn't want to lose the power of Shisui's eye, he didn't have any choice in the matter. He tried to focus chakra into the implanted eye, but then Kushina crushed it beneath her thumb. Oi, let's not have any of that overpowered Sharingan shit. You forget, I'm an expert in chakra sensory. I sensed that implanted eye from the jump. Felt familiar too. Did that one in your eye socket belong to that Shisui kid? Ah well, won't be doing you much good anymore. Now where was I? Oh, yeah, time to put you out of everyone's misery. The evil Uzumaki muttered as she grabbed some of Danzo's intestines and then looped it around his neck and tugged, now garroting him with his own guts. The aged war hawk reached out, his lone eye pleading for help, until his hand fell down and gurgling noises escaped his lips. Having finally died, and being freed from his gruesome end. With a content sigh, the blood-stained Kuno,